are lighting the fourth candle of Advent, which represents love. Specifically, it's God's love for humanity, but it's also the candle that flickers with the highest sense that something's about to happen. Anticipation peaks, nervous energy is expended with all the last-second checks to make sure everything's ready. Have you ever heard that someone famous was coming to town? Someone high-profile enough that people lined up just to meet them or get an autograph? I remember back in 2012, Kansas City hosted the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. My wife and I took a few days off so we could go to all the festivities leading up to the game. One of the events was a massive baseball exhibit downtown. When we walked in, there were booths everywhere, interactive stations, and several community events going on. One of those events was a fundraiser featuring a meet and greet with former Royal center fielder and Hall of Famer Willie Wilson. Now, you might not know who he is, but I sure did. And as a kid, the very first baseball number I ever wore was his. I played his position, watched him whenever I could, and tried to imitate everything he did. So there I was, standing in a long line, waiting for my moment to meet one of my childhood heroes. Something happens to us when we know someone significant is nearby. We rearrange schedules, buy tickets, and do whatever we can just to catch a glimpse of them. I can't help but think about Simeon, whom we meet in Luke chapter 2. Someone who wasn't promised the chance to meet just any important person. He was promised that he would see the Son of God before he died. Imagine the eagerness. Imagine the exhilaration building in his heart for years. Well, Joseph and Mary bring their newborn son to the temple to present him to the Lord, just as the law of Leviticus commands. And it's there, in that ordinary moment, that Simeon sees him, the Messiah, the one he has been waiting his whole life to see. And Simeon can't hold back. He sings, "Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light of revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to your people, Israel." What a song for an old man in the temple to sing. Simeon saw what almost everyone else in the temple missed that day. He saw that salvation wasn't a system, it wasn't a set of rules or techniques. Salvation was a person, and that person was small enough to cradle in his arms. Can you imagine holding that baby, God's son, and singing over him? It must have overwhelmed him. Simeon sings to this person and about this person because it is in this person, Jesus, that we find peace. In him we discover joy. In him we find hope. And in him addictions and vices lose their power. In him evil meets its match. In Jesus, the full love of God takes on flesh. Our prayer for you this season is that, like Simeon, you will have eyes to see Christ. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Will you find your salvation in the love God expresses through this child? Will you have the same urgency as men like Simeon? Urgency. Well, that's an interesting concept. It can mean many things, but when you're in the middle of it, your focus sharpens and your passion is ignited. Sometimes I catch myself marveling at the urgency with which Paul wrote his letters. Imagine him pressing his quill so hard against the parchment, or if he's dictating, the poor scribe scrambling to keep up with the pace of Paul's thoughts. One place I especially picture this is in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received," and then he launches into the heartbeat of the gospel. Well, today I feel that same kind of urgency. Darrell Johnson shares an Advent thought that feeds this sense of resolve, and it goes something like this. We should be absolutely stunned when we read Matthew's account of the Christmas story, especially when we get to Jesus' genealogy. Matthew does something shocking for the first century. He includes the names of 4 women in addition to Mary. Those women are Tamar, the mother of Perez and Zerah, Rahab, the mother of Boaz, Ruth, the mother of Obed, and Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah and mother of Solomon. Now, this is amazing for several reasons. First, in the first century world, women's names simply weren't included in genealogies. They didn't have very many legal rights, and their status was tied to the men around them. A genealogy's purpose was to build a man's reputation, so why include women, especially in the lineage of the Messiah? Second, 3 of the 4 women weren't even Jewish by birth. Tamar was a Canaanite, Rahab was from Jericho, Ruth was a Moabite, and Bathsheba, though Jewish, had married Uriah the Hittite. Right at the foundation of Jesus' family tree, we find Gentiles, people considered outsiders. And third, 3 of these women had morally complicated stories. Tamar seduced her own father-in-law, Judah. Rahab was a prostitute, and Bathsheba committed adultery with King David. And while Ruth was personally upright, she was still a Moabite, a descendant of Lot, born of incest. Deuteronomy 23:3 even says, "No Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord to the 10th generation." So how in the world do these 4 women end up in the genealogy of the Messiah? This is not how you build a credible reputation for the Savior of the world. Why does Matthew include them? Well, I can think of only one reason. These are precisely the kinds of people the Christ child came for. Their presence in Jesus' genealogy reveals the heart of God. Their inclusion signals the inclusion of all of us. It tells us that Jesus came to break down the barriers of the old world, the walls of class, ethnicity, gender, and reputation. Right from the beginning, everything that divides us starts to crumble in the presence of God's love. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. From the very first chapter of his gospel, Matthew is signaling what he makes explicit later. The child is born for sinners. He is born for the broken, the flawed, the outsider. He was born for me. He comes through the sinful to identify with the immoral, to rescue the wicked from their sins. That's why his name is Jesus. As Matthew says right after the genealogy, "For he will save his people from their sins." In the devotional work Darkness Then Light, from which we gleaned our Advent theme, Scott James compares a stargazing experience he had while camping to waiting for the arrival of the immortal King. He recalls a time in his tent when it was pitch black and he needed to step into the openness where the star stood out against the blackest of skies. You see, it's against the dark backdrop that light resonates the most. The stars are always there, but we don't know it until the sun sets. The diamond is always sparkling, but it becomes apparent when the jeweler places it on the black velvet with just the right amount of light. We light this 4th candle, and the anticipation for the light is at its peak, because it's when it seems the bleakest that Advent shines brightest. It's also the candle that completes the light that surrounds the one unlit candle in the middle. At the center of every Advent wreath stands one candle, the Christ candle. It's placed in the middle for a reason. All the other candles, hope, peace, joy, and love, point toward it. They prepare us for it. They remind us that every longing of the human heart ultimately finds its fulfillment in Jesus. When we light the Christ candle, we're declaring that the wait is over. The light of the world has come. Not a distant idea, not a warm feeling, but a person, a Savior who steps into our darkness, not to overwhelm us, but to guide us home. The Christ candle shines with a steady, unwavering flame, reminding us that Christ's presence is not fragile or fleeting. His light doesn't depend on our strength, our goodness, our mood. His light shines because he is faithful, because he is God with us, and because he is the one who came to save. So, as this candle burns at the center of the wreath, let it also burn at the center of our lives. Let the light of Jesus illuminate our fears, warm our cold places, and lead us into hope, peace, joy, and love that only he can give. The waiting is over. Christmas has come, and his light is here to stay. We invite you to join us this Christmas Eve at South Rock Christian Church when we see what happens when the Christ candle comes to life. Our services are at 1 o'clock, 3, 5, and 7 o'clock. Join us as we celebrate and marvel at the light of the world entering into darkness and experience the blessing of God's movement in darkness, then light.